And I'm just going to turn my radio off. Sorry.
It's okay. Elizabeth, do you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a minute and we will start. And so, how can I show your presentation?
How did you want to do that? We should have talked about this before. Have you got a screen there that you can show them, and I'll just say slide 1, slide 2?
Yes,
yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Dimitri.
Hello, Elizabeth. We are here. We are again together.
Yes. Hello, Helen. Hi. Hello. Okay. Oh.
Ребята, тихо, садимся, идет запись.
Just a minute, Elizabeth.
Sure.
So, Elizabeth, we can start.
Okay. Can you put the screen so I can see everyone, or is that too hard?
Sorry, but no.
No. Okay. But everybody can see me, is that right? Okay. Well, I guess I'll begin by saying hello, everyone, and it's lovely to be talking to you. I'd love to be there in Minsk. It's a city I've always wanted to visit, so it's nice to be visiting it virtually. Olga, you have the first slide up.
Yeah.
So what I thought I'd like to talk about in this 45 minutes is up there on the screen, LARP and the fun of learning through play, and an exploration of the place of role in play and learning, looking at how live action role play and learning about reality through play can help each other. So I need to say I have never been in a LARP activity. I've read about them, and I've certainly spent the last few days exploring what's available. It's always something I've wanted to do, I just haven't had the chance to. So what I'm going to be talking about is very much from the perspective of being an educator who's looking at using simulation in education and wishing I had the freedom that I see LARP provides to people. So I've only got about 8 slides. I'm going to talk to each one. And because I can't see you and I'd really like to have some feedback, what I'd like to do is maybe after the end of each slide or so is just to ask you to have a short conversation with each other, and then maybe for Olga or Dimitri or Helen or somebody else to tell me what you're talking about so that I know that I'm on track, especially to have some questions from everyone. So the thing for me about role play is that I'm getting some feedback. Am I coming through clearly to you? Olga?
Yeah.
Good, okay, sorry, I was just getting some feedback. I thought I might have been breaking up. So if you could put the second slide up.
Second?
Yeah, role play, real life. Okay. So where I want to start then is what is role play and what is real life, and how do we use it? So for me, role play draws on the principles and practices that inform all use of what I would think of as drama-oriented interactions. And by drama, I mean an emotional engagement. So in LARP, there is a huge emotional engagement, but it's not just, that's not the right word. It's about fun and delight. It's not necessarily about learning, but it's using role to, for a while, become somebody else, to have fun and think about yourself in a different way because you're in a role. So real life gives us the themes and concepts for drama and therefore for role play. And I think one of the things that people who oppose LARP and don't like role play in education do not understand is that role play is representing life. It isn't real life as such. But sometimes people tend to confuse role play and say, oh, this is real, and it's not true, so none of it is good. The thing for me is that we can't escape real life. We're in it. You're in Minsk, and I'm in Mikkeli in Finland, and there are millions of other people around the world. We are all in that setting that we're in. And while we're in real life, that's where we are. But when we step into the drama of role play, we can be anywhere else in the world that we wish to be, because we are now using the dramatic conceit of stepping into a role, and we can turn the world around us, that's still my desk and your conference room and so on, we can still turn it into an imaginary space. And it's using that imaginary space that education and LARP, and I'll talk about what I mean by education in a minute. For me, when I see those people who are involved in LARP, and I wish I could be there, they're consciously immersing themselves in play, so they are being conscious about it, and it is a totally immersive experience. And I know people who use computer games talk about immersive experiences, but I think they really need to play a LARP before they understand what full immersion means. I don't think you can ever immerse yourself in a computer game in the same way as you can with LARP. And it's always just for pleasure. Well, most, and again, that's something I'll talk about again in a minute. The other thing then is that educational role play, the kind that I use, is associated with learning. And that means that pleasure, the sheer enjoyment of being in a place and having fun, that's only an option. It's not something that comes with the territory. So for me, that's one of the big distinctions between LARP and what I'm calling educational role play. So it draws on drama, creates drama, but LARP sees it as doing that for fun, and education sees it has a serious purpose. So Olga, the next slide please. And one of the things that really struck me when I was researching this and thinking about it from the experience of LARP and the theme of the conference is that LARP and education seem to be a long way apart. So LARP is usually not seen as educational, and education is usually not seen as anything where people are supposed to have fun. And it's that word fun and play that I see them connecting on, but our expectations then keep them apart. This side we can have fun, but this side we have to be serious and we can't connect them. And I think that's wrong. I think it's very wrong. In LARP, the focus is on play and fantasy and fun. The expectations about what's going to happen and why it will be good, or when it's not so good, why it's not so good, they're not based on validity. Was it true or not true is, as far as I can see, not a primary question that is asked in LARP environment. The question might be, did it fit with the story? Did it connect with who we thought we were playing and what we thought the story was about? there's an internal to the story validity, but in education, the validity is seen as external to what's happening in the classroom. Does it fit with the outside world? In LARP, the boundaries are only limited by the imagination, and often in education, the boundary is the door out of the classroom. And for LARP, as I said, it's just about enjoyment. Now, that's one side of the equation. Now we'll look at the other. By education, what I mean is anything that is formal education. So classrooms, primary schools, high schools, university, formal workplace environments. That kind of education where we are being educated for a purpose. Its roots are in what I call a lengthy habituation into formality. When we walk into a classroom, if we are a teacher, we know where we have to go. To the front of the room, pick up the whiteboard marker or the chalk, turn on the computer, turn and face the students and be in charge. And then for the students, it's walk in, sit down and wait to be told. And that kind of habituation is very hard to break. So you really have to go to a hugely different environment, which is what LARP provides. So that those perceptions limit the options for educators. They don't limit the options and the storytellers in LARP. So it's that limiting of options that I think I would like to see LARP offer much more. It to be part of the social engagement, for it to be a tool for social development. That's one of its really big strengths. It creates environments that are other than formal education. In education, there's very little fun, mostly. There's certainly very little play after you leave kindergarten or early primary school. And if you're going to deal with fantasy, well, you'll probably be going to the drama classes. You don't do that in physics or maths or geography. In education, the boundaries are very limited. So my parents, when I went to school, expected that certain things would happen in my education environment. And if they didn't happen, then they felt they had a right to say, well, why isn't it happening? And I was not supposed to be having fun at school. So why was she having fun at school was a question that was often asked. School isn't about fun. And those boundaries mean that there's very little capacity for individual educators to introduce LARP as a component of learning. And yet that's a pity because of what it can offer. Now, when I was researching, I found a reference to one Danish school that has taken the classroom out of the room and out into the open and uses quite a lot of LARP activities. But I didn't find many references to similar schools. In Australia, where I'm from, when I'm not in Finland, there was a big news report recently that a primary school for children 5 to 8 years old was actually planning to be conducted totally in the open air. There were going to be no rooms, maybe some tents for comfort when it was raining heavily, but everything was going to happen outside because that's where all the maths and the physics and the writing and so on. And that made headline news around Australia because it's so far outside our expectations. But I don't know, I haven't been able to look closely, but to me that's where LARP as an approach to learning takes. So what I see is these two sets of expectations and differences mean that education doesn't know how to learn from LARP or doesn't want to learn from LARP, and those people who use and are engaged with LARP don't know how to communicate with education. And for me, I think that's a really sad state of affairs because each has a lot to offer the other. And certainly, if they can work together as Ouch. Are you there? Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Something's wrong with the internet, and maybe 5 minutes we lost. But
Oh, it's only just gone off for me. So where did we get up to before I dropped out?
well, you were talking about LARP as a component of learning.
Okay. So did I talk about, so which slide and how far through the slide?
Why are LARP and education not closely together? And you are in the end of this slide.
Okay, because before we went to the next slide, what I was going to ask, are there some questions people would like to ask me? Because it would be really useful if I could respond to some questions. So if everybody would like to take a moment and think of the question to ask me. And I'll write them down.
Если они есть, потому что мне будет удобнее так что-то объяснить.
Пока их нет, давайте подождем.
Seems like no questions yet, so
Great.
go on, please.
Okay, so you're on the next slide. So the next slide is right. Really? Right. Okay. So on this slide, I had to do some guesswork. So if all of the audience are more experienced than I am, and I got any of it wrong, please tell me where I can. So when I look at role play, as it occurs in line of action role play, it's free from those constraints, formal education. The only boundary is the extent to which the players can suspend disbelief. And I wanted to ask if everybody understands the term suspend disbelief. Perhaps I'll go on, but if people would like to ask me about that, I'll go back. But that's the only boundary. If I can go and be a member of a LARP team and get fully involved, then I will do whatever the role play says. Next thing is that it's anchored in the context. So the role play is only constrained by what the context offers and by what the role helps us to see the context. And I'll talk about the educational constraints in a minute. I'm role play as a very wide approach to role play.
Elizabeth, sorry,
Yep.
Dimitri, can I ask you a question?
Ouch, yes?
Really, for me, it's very surprisingly not clear the suspend disbelief. Of course,
Okay.
it was a great importance, and because it is a role playing, should I believe to myself? Should I believe to my partners? And so on. Could you please clarify?
Okay. The phrase was from an English poet from a long time ago, and by suspending disbelief, he meant that we are able to pretend that we are somebody else. So it is easy for me to see that I'm sitting here in Finland and I'm listening to everyone, listening to the noises, and I'm watching the screen and you're watching me. If this was a role play, then I could quite easily pretend like somebody else, and if I was to speak as let's say I was a role play in 15th century Austria, and I was the leader of a team that had surrounded her castle. Then in that role, I would be speaking to Olga only as if I was that 15th century leader of the surrounding team. I would not stop and say, oh, and by the way, did you have a nice cup of coffee at the restaurant last night? I would be saying, these are my demands, here is the number of days. I would be totally in the role, and it would be quite difficult for me if somebody comes along and says something like, hey, do you know that there's going to be an election in Germany in next week? That's so far outside the role that it will really unsettle me. So it's suspending disbelief means that for the duration of the role, I become whoever I make the role to be, and I suspend, I put behind the curtain, I ignore all the real things about me, how old I might be, how many children I have, what kind of car I drive, because that's not in the role. Does that help, Dimitri?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay. And in LARP, what I see is that people find it really easy to suspend disbelief. If you look at the photograph at the bottom of that slide, nobody is standing there saying, hey, what's going on around here? What am I in the middle of? Everybody is standing, looking, ready to do battle. They have suspended from the mind the thought that they might be a bank manager or a bus driver. For this period of time, they are about to go into battle, and that's all they're thinking of. Then when it's over, they will put that disbelief aside and go back to the real world. So LARP, the only boundary for players in LARP is how well they are able to do that. And some people, I think, can do it better than others. And those people who oppose LARP or who disparage it or who make negative comments about it are the ones who are least able to suspend their disbelief. They think that the real world that they are standing in is the only world and they can't go outside it. So the second thing that formal education has as a constraint that LARP does not is that context. So the guys in the picture, they're standing in a field. I think if I look closely, there's a city over on the far horizon on the right. They're not dressed to go into that city, that 21st century city. They're dressed for some medieval occasion. But everything they do will be anchored in the context of being in that medieval environment. In education, our context is bounded by the classroom we are in. Then the third thing is there's a willingness to be involved. The only people who get involved in LARP, as far as I can see, is the people who enjoy it and who want to play. But everybody has to be involved in education. That means in education there will be people who really don't want to play role. Another factor in role play is the capacity of the authors to design good scenarios. Now, in the simulation world where I work, that is a crucial skill. And I can see that it applies also in LARP, that you have to be able to design a really good story and setting such that people will agree and accept in their minds that that is where they are. In an educational environment, we walk into a classroom and we sit down and the teacher teaches us maths, and whether they're good at teaching maths means they put numbers up on the board. They don't have to create an environment for us. In LARP, in role play, there's no attention to, or little attention to, assessment of anything. People, I'm sure, at the end of an extended LARP will sit down and do a debriefing. How well did we do? How true was it? Can we do it better next time? But there's no assessment that then says, well, you passed or you failed, and this will have an effect on your career. So it's free of those kinds of assessment constraints. And to me, that's one of the things that I see as we try and fit LARP type activities into formal education. That will be one of the boundary points, the sticking points, because education expects that everything will be assessed. We have to have numbers and how well did you do, and did you pass or did you fail? And LARP, as I understand it, doesn't have that same focus on was it good or bad, did you pass? And I'd love to see more education that operates that way. Then the final issue on this slide is two really important words that I think apply to all role play. The first one is validity, and I've touched on this briefly. It's how true is this scenario, this uniform, this storyline to what it is that we're doing? And how well are we able to check the truthfulness of its fit? So when we're studying history, we have to be very careful that the books that we read about history are telling us the best truth that they can about events. Now, as a history teacher, as I once was, I am now very sceptical about all history books, because all historians tell us the story of events from their point of view, but they then claim that it's objective truth. And in LARP, it doesn't have to be objective. We don't have to check about whether it's true or not. And we also don't have to check whether it's verifiable. So if I go back to that 15th century battle in Austria, it's not going to be important to me to check whether how I worked as the commander of that force could be tracked back and found to be true for a commander of a force in Austria, in that area, because it doesn't matter. What matters is whether I did it well in the moment now. So that's something that I see as a big issue for the crossover between role play as a learning medium and formal education. And the really interesting thing for me is that while all of those things that I've got on the list are there in LARP, that's what makes it fun. They're the things that help make LARP so engaging and get so many hundreds of people along to events. All of those together mean that we can have fun and we don't have to measure things and we don't have to look at the truthfulness of it. Nobody's going to test us on it afterwards. That's why we get involved, because it's fun, and that's all. So I'll go, any questions on that slide before we go on? Or on what I've said?
Elizabeth, do you hear me?
Yep. Yes, I can.
Yes,
So, Elizabeth, I feel that maybe my colleagues are very delightful for this quite theoretical things, but many practical things in your work could be even more helpful. For instance, some habits or some hints that you're using, so maybe you will impart them in your lecture. Maybe practical, how to work out some things.
And use role play in education.
Yes, in your
Okay.
Because in one day, Helen Bikachova will show your game, So something that explains how important is theory to be in a good practical shape.
Okay, now I'm not sure that I've got those answered in the next slide, but I will make sure that I answer your question before I finish. So I have another 20 minutes. So let me go through the last couple of slides. Are there other questions, Dimitri, from anybody else? Does anybody else?
In Russian, maybe, and then translate. Что
Okay.
интересно, редкий случай. Уже написано, я прочитаю, да? So let me read something.
Sure.
There are some special term as a free entrance in the game, in pedagogic. It is the first point for your attention. Could you tell how does it work as a system in LARP? So free entrance in the game. Second,
This is free. You're saying free entrance into the game. I haven't heard the term before, so I will have a guess at what it means, but if I get it wrong, please tell me.
all things would be very helpful. But there are some other questions, please.
Okay.
Olga will explain them.
Elizabeth, our audience wants to know, is it possible for a person who enter the game in 20 minutes to change something, to make some changes in this system of the game?
Now, do you mean?
And is it real works, this rule of free entrance in the game?
I need to understand the phrase free entrance in the game. It's not one.
Я написала вопрос.
Поясните в нескольких словах, подойдите сюда и скажите, что для вас интересно, так как можете.
В педагогике есть правило просто такое свободное вхождение. И мне интересно, может ли человек через 20 минут войти в эту игру, потому что она же уже началась.
Объясните, что такое свободное вхождение.
Может войти. Вот я объясняю, через 20 минут игры, когда игра началась, человек имеет право войти. И есть ли строгие правила? Да, может ли он войти через 20 минут, не начав эту игру, и может ли он изменить ход игры?
So, is it strict to begin the game to begin the game at the start, or you can enter anytime?
Oh, okay.
And can you change something if you enter in 20 minutes?
Good, okay. So, I am not sure how that works in LARP. My perception would be that if you enter a LARP activity partway through the activity, you would need to have 3 things in mind. The first that you would need to have is, where is the scenario up to? So if I'm going to enter, say that LARP on the screen, I would need to know what has gone before and what is about to happen. So you can't, if I'm understanding the term right, I don't think you can have free entry. You would have to have informed entry. I would need to ask of somebody, what is happening? Where is the scenario? Where are we up to in the story? What are we about to do? I can't just walk in and start without asking those 3 questions. And the same applies for role play in education. You can't, I do not believe that it's useful. It may be possible for somebody to do it, but it is not useful to try and walk into a role play without preparation, would be my answer. And then, so, no, I don't think you can do free entry into a game. You have to prepare. Preparation may not take long. It may only be a minute or 2. But you can't just walk in, because it's like, what's a parallel? It would be like somebody walking into a family and saying, hi, I'm your 21-year-old son, when the parents know that the only children they've had are girls. You can't do that, and you mean people would just look at you and say, well, you're a bit weird, and no, you're not our son. So the same in life. You can't walk in and say, "Hi, I'm the monster from over the hill," when there is no monster in the scenario and no reason. So you have to prepare, and that's where the suspension of disbelief comes in. You have to listen to the story and believe the story and then become part of the story. I hope, I mean, that's my belief. That is, I would always try and do that if I was joining a LARP game, and certainly when I'm using role play in classroom, I make sure those three things happen. So is that answering the question before I go on?
Thank you very much.
Okay, you can go on.
Okay, now, the second question was, is it possible for those entering a game to change the system in 20 minutes? Is that do I have the question correct?
У вас сохраняется вопрос об изменении игры, войдя в нее через 20 минут?
Нет, все
It's okay,
понятно.
you can start your...
Okay. Then in a game, or in a LARP activity, if somebody comes in late, as long as they understand the game, they know what role they're playing, and they know how their actions might influence the outcome, then yes, it is possible for them to change the outcome of the game. But they have to know those things first. Why am I coming in? What actions do I need to take? What will be the impact of those actions? Are those the impacts that I want to have happen? Will something else happen instead? I have to think about all of those questions. If I have good answers for them, then yes, it becomes possible to change the system of the game. But remember, they're only changing the system of the game. They're not changing real life. It's like somebody walking, well, let's see, in politics in New Zealand, they have had a most fascinating election. Nobody could have predicted the result of their election. There has been one party re-elected every 4 years for 16 years, and that party thought it would be re-elected again. There is some dissatisfaction with the party. There is what they call a hung vote, and one person has an opportunity, because he has a small party and can throw his weight around, to pick the Prime Minister. And he picked a 38-year-old woman who has never been in politics before. Now, he changed the whole system, but he's very experienced at politics. So in real life, it's possible to change the system, but only when you really understand what it is that you're working with and how the changes you might want to make will change the system. So yes, it's quite possible, but you need a lot of knowledge. Or you could walk in and try and blow things up, and then you might change the system, but you'll probably end the game, whether it's in a classroom or a LARP activity. Because people will, if you do it wrongly, you break that suspension of disbelief, and everybody falls back into knowing the reality that I'm just a bus driver playing at being Henry II. And this is a bit silly, I'd better go home. Because you've blown up my capacity to continue to imagine the story that's been created for me. So yes, it's possible. Be very careful and be really thoughtful and make sure that you're very well prepared before you do so. So does that help? Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. Are there more questions, or shall I go on?
You go on, please.
Okay. So the other side, role play in education, like the game Helen will play for you tomorrow, lots of people think that role play in education is not a good idea. It takes too long, so time. I'm not prepared to do it, will be what the teacher says, because often the the teacher will feel embarrassed and not knowing what to do. Now, while a teacher is embarrassed, their capacity to run a role play is almost nil. So that's a constraint. That's why we don't have role play, because teachers don't know how to do it. Students become unwilling to do it because the teacher is embarrassed and uncomfortable. So you have a dramatic relationship. The teacher says, oh, I don't think I can do that. And the student says, well, I'm not going to try. So there's a self-imposed perception in educational context that says role play is not a good idea. Now, that isn't based on fact. It's only based on emotion. It's based on the emotions of people who don't feel that they can use role play, so they don't anybody use role play, because then they might have to and they'd be embarrassed. It's easier if nobody does it, and then they don't have to either. One of the other problems is how do we fit a role into a formal context? So if I was going to role play the French Revolution or the revolution in Russia of 1917, and I wanted somebody to be Lenin, and I wanted somebody to be MV Frunze, who was one of Lenin's military commanders, then I would have to spend the time to explain to the students what each of those people did, and how do I fit that into a story? Isn't it just easy for me to say that Lenin started the Russian Revolution, and that in 1919 MV Frunze was his military commander who took the Red Armies over to Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, and made sure that by 1924 all of the stands, Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan part of the new Russian Federation. It's easy for me to say it in 3 or 4 sentences than it is to give equal roles. So education says, oh, it's too hard, we can't do it. How do we fit an education role? LARP says that's part of the fun. What kind of role might we play for somebody to be Lenin or anybody else? So LARP brings the fun in and encourages us to play. Education says, no, that's too difficult, we'll just stick with the facts. Some of the other constraints, again, that issue of how does education verify, does it say it's true? Sometimes it's not true. And education has to become aware and accept that some of what it's been telling students is not true. And that it's okay for it to be not true because we can play with other ways of understanding. And that, to me, that's where role play and LARP come in. We can look at the boundaries of truthfulness. And then what we have to do is figure out how do we assess. Now, if I'm a really good role player, and I play Marie Antoinette really well, I get extra marks because I can get inside what she might have been like and talk of what she does? Or should I only get the marks for writing an essay about what Marie Antoinette did and said? They're the kinds of questions that education, social expectations of education, we all have to answer. I believe we can do it. I'm here talking to you because I believe we can do it, but I accept that it's very hard. And when you put all of those issues together, there are very formidable resistance. So are there some questions before I go on?
No questions, but you have only a few minutes left, so if it's possible,
I have some. Okay. So, how can LARP engage with education? That is role play and live action role play, all of those wonderful things that are about enjoyment, fun, play. How can that engage with education? So I think on this list I've got some of the things that I think those people who are engaged with LARP, promote it and know its benefits, these are things they can do for education. They can help all human beings understand the benefits of play. they can help when they're in a role, when they're in a LARP activity, maybe debrief at the end and say, well, you guys were all really creative, you had lots of fun, how could you use this back at work? You can talk to education as formal partners and equal partners. I know that the Institute at Minsk did one. I found some other equivalent researchers in some universities in America, and particularly here in Scandinavia, where people are saying, this is an appropriate area of research. We need more of that. I think LARP needs to be the leader. It should not wait for education, but it needs to lead in saying, we have learning strategies that are of value. And those people involved in LARP need to validate fun as a socially acceptable way of learning. And you know, I'm pretty sure you guys all do that, but this is something I think we could do more of. I think LARP can speak its language about play and engagement much more forcefully. And it needs to, its components need to talk to those people who think formality is the only way to educate. And finally, education needs to learn to take risks, to consider how to validate and verify things in different ways, to support educators already using LARP, to challenge the old notions of what is relevant and acceptable knowledge, to be flexible. And always to say play is a worthwhile tool for learning. And my little drawing at the end, which isn't mine, I borrowed it. Your comfort zone is down in this little space. What education can learn from LARP is stepping over into where the magic happens. LARP can create magic in education in the way that formal understandings and perceptions of education can't. Yeah, so let's leave it there. It's because time's up. If there are any questions or things that people would like to send me, please do. And I did audio take this, so I will send to Dimitri the audio of what I've said if you would like to listen to it again. So that's it from me. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I hope I've been helpful. Absolutely, yes, please do. Okay. More than happy to. What I'll do is I'll send you a slide revision and put my name and contact details on.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll send that to you now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Дорогие друзья, тут вот какое дело. Сейчас у нас есть небольшая кофе-пауза, так как по техническим причинам она у нас меньше, чем у всех других. Вы можете сейчас пройти и взять кофе, и, может быть, взять его с собой, потому что в 17:00 у нас опять же мост. Вот, и вы можете пройти вот здесь, вот